The wind was a predator tonight, howling around the rough-hewn cabin, clawing at the shutters like something desperate to get in. Inside, it was cold, a deep, marrow-penetrating chill that the meager fire in the hearth seemed to barely acknowledge. Alara huddled deeper into the thin blankets on the cot, the rough wool scratching her cheek. Her world was sound and touch and the cloying scent of pine resin and stale pipe smoke. It had been sound and touch for 12 years now, ever since the fever took her sight, but tonight, the darkness felt heavier, thicker with unfamiliar dread. She listened to the man across the room. Silas. The name sat strange on her tongue, a solid, unyielding sound like the man himself. He moved with quiet competence, stoking the fire, the scrape of the shovel against stone, the rattle of logs. He hadn't said much since Jedediah had shoved her through the door 2 nights ago, a bundle of misery and fear, muttering about a deal and getting her off his hands. Jedediah, her husband of 4 months, the man who had sworn to protect her, had traded her for a horse and some supplies to a stranger in a dusty saloon. The shame burned hotter than the cold. Silas had simply accepted the transaction with a nod, the flicker of the saloon's lamp casting long, deep shadows on his face, masking his expression entirely. He had brought her here, led her stumbling steps through the snow, his grip on her arm firm but not unkind. Since then, silence. Only the sounds of his movements, the rhythmic breath of sleep from the other side of the room, the relentless wind. Fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach. What did this man want? Why had he taken her? Jedediah's words, slurred and cruel, echoed. Useless mouth to feed. Least she can fetch something. Maybe she can. I dunno. Fetch wood or something useless. That was her value. A burden traded away. Tears pricked behind her sightless eyes, hot and useless. She blinked them back. Crying solved nothing. It only made the cold feel colder. She focused on the sounds, trying to map the small space. The creak of the floorboards under his boots, the hiss of the fire, the distant mournful howl of a wolf. Outside, the world was white and unforgiving. Inside, it was dark and unknown. She could feel his presence, a stillness in the air when he stopped moving, a weight she couldn't see but sensed. He wasn't cruel, not like Jedediah, but he wasn't kind either. He was simply there, a mountain, silent and imposing. He cleared his throat, a rough, dry sound that startled her. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Soup's warm," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like stones tumbling down a slope. It was the first time he'd spoken to her directly since they arrived. She swallowed, her throat tight. "Thank you," she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. She heard him cross the floor, the gentle clink of a bowl being placed on the rough-hewn table nearby. The air shifted, carrying the faint, savory scent of broth. He didn't offer to help her to the table. He just stood there. She understood. This was a test of her ability to navigate the dark, to function, to prove she wasn't entirely useless. Taking a deep breath, she pushed herself up. The cot creaked. She extended a hand tentatively, feeling for the edge of the mattress, the rough weave of the blanket. She swung her legs over, her feet finding the cold floorboards. Slowly, carefully, she stood, reaching out her hands before her, fingers brushing the air. Every obstacle was a potential disaster, a stumble, a fall, proof of her helplessness. But she knew this darkness. She navigated it every day. It was the unknown obstacles, the new space, that terrified her. She shuffled forward, counting the steps she'd heard him take, judging the distance. 1, 2, 3. Her hand brushed against the edge of the table, a splintery surface under her fingertips. Relief washed over her, swift and quiet. She found the bowl warm against her hand, the smooth curve of the spoon. She sat down, her movements slow and deliberate. She could feel his gaze on her, though she couldn't see it. A silent evaluation. She ate slowly, the warm soup a small comfort against the gnawing fear and the gnawing cold. She wouldn't meet his expectations of helplessness. She wouldn't be Jedediah's burden any longer. even if she didn't know what she would be instead. The days bled into a rhythm dictated by the unforgiving demands of the mountain winter. Alara learned the cabin. She mapped it in her mind, step by careful step, touch by touch. The worn edge of the table, the rough texture of the log walls, the varying warmth of the floor near the hearth. Silas remained a presence more than a person, moving through the space with quiet purpose. He wasn't cruel, but neither was he kind in any conventional way. He provided food, warmth, shelter. Nothing more. He didn't speak unless necessary, and his words were clipped, functional. Wood, water, food. She tried to help, tried to sweep the floor, though she often missed patches, tried to wash the dishes, the risk of breaking precious crockery a constant worry. She fumbled, she stumbled, the dark sometimes seeming to rise up and mock her efforts. Shame was a bitter taste, but she kept trying. She wouldn't be useless. One afternoon, as she sat by the fire, listening to the crackle of the flames, she felt a shift in the air outside. It wasn't the wind. It was something subtler, a change in the pressure, a whisper against her skin that spoke of gathering weight. "It's going to snow again," she murmured, mostly to herself. Silas, across the room mending a saddle, grunted. "Sky's clear." She shook her head. "No, not clear. It feels heavy, like wool." He didn't respond. But later that evening, large, silent flakes began to drift down, muffling the sounds of the forest, piling up against the cabin walls. He didn't mention her prediction. He didn't need to. The snow was affirmation enough. It happened again a few days later. She was outside, carefully navigating the well-worn path to the outhouse, when a sudden, sharp sound cut through the quiet air, the distinct crack of a dry branch snapping somewhere beyond the immediate clearing. It was followed by a rustle, different from the wind. "Someone's out there," she said, turning her head towards the sound. Silas, splitting wood near the cabin, paused, axe in hand. "Hear the wind, girl." "No," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't the wind. It felt furtive, like a shadow moving in the periphery of a sightless world. "Near the south ridge. There's 2 of them." Silas lowered his axe slowly. He was silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, he went inside the cabin. She heard the click of a rifle being loaded. He came back out, scanning the tree line with sharp, assessing eyes. He didn't see anything. But he didn't dismiss her, not entirely this time. He stood there for a long while, still as stone, rifle held loosely, gaze fixed on the south ridge. The rustling sound didn't repeat. After about an hour, he finally relaxed, the tension draining from his shoulders. He didn't speak of it, but she noticed he didn't let her go outside alone for the rest of the day. Her sight wasn't visual. It was something else. An instinct, a heightened awareness. She could feel the shift in Silas's mood, the tension in his silence, the subtle difference in the air when he was troubled. She could sense the presence of things unseen by the eye, the approaching storm, the hidden movement in the trees. It was like the world hummed with information she could feel, interpret, understand in a way others couldn't. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. It was proof she wasn't useless. She could see things he couldn't. He started watching her more closely after that. Not with suspicion, but with a quiet, assessing curiosity. Sometimes, when she spoke of a feeling, a subtle change in the atmosphere, he would pause, his movements stilling as he listened. He wouldn't always agree, but he would listen. The silent mountain was starting to show cracks, glimpses of the man beneath the stone. And Alara, navigating her world of darkness and newfound perception, felt a fragile thread of connection starting to form in the isolation, spun from shared silence and unspoken understanding. The mountain winter tightened its grip. Snow piled higher, the wind bit harder. The isolation of the cabin felt absolute. The thread between Alara and Silas, fragile at first, had thickened, woven from necessity and a quiet, growing understanding. He had stopped calling her girl, sometimes he even used her name, a rough sound that somehow felt gentle when he said it. He would describe things now, not just functional objects, but details. The pattern of frost on the window pane, the color of the sunset, the tracks of a hare in the snow. He was showing her the world she couldn't see, filtering it through his stoic gaze. And she, in turn, would share her sight, her feelings of the air, the ground, the distant sounds. "The air feels sharp tonight," she said one evening, sitting by the fire. "And lo, like the ground is pulling it down." Silas, checking the cabin's provisions, paused. He went to the door, opening it a crack. The wind swirled in, bringing with it the scent of pine and bitter cold. He stood there for a long moment, sniffing the air, listening. "Pressure dropping," he murmured. "Could be another big one." They spent the next day reinforcing the cabin, boarding up windows, stacking extra wood high. The storm hit that night with a ferocity that shook the cabin's foundations. The wind shrieked like a banshee, and the snow hammered against the walls. They huddled by the fire, two small figures against the mountain's rage. During the worst of it, a massive gust tore a section of shutters loose. "West window," Alara cried out, her voice barely audible over the din, pointing instinctively. "Northwest corner." Silas reacted instantly, grabbing a heavy blanket and spare boards, battling the wind to nail them back in place. He hadn't questioned how she knew exactly which shutter. Her sight, whatever it was now a tool accepted and relied upon. Her ability became more pronounced, more specific. She could feel the difference between a distant deer and a larger animal approaching. She could sense a change in the forest's mood, a tension that spoke of predator or prey. And increasingly, she felt a presence that wasn't of the wild. A human presence. "They're coming back," she said one morning, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Jedediah." Silas stiffened. He had never asked about her past, about the man who sold her. But he knew. His jaw tightened. "How many?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Two," she said, focusing, the feeling a cold dread settling in her gut. "Maybe three. And they're angry." The tension in the cabin became a palpable thing. Silas was quiet, watchful, his movements efficient and precise. He checked his rifle, sharpened his knife. Alara tried to be useful, tending the fire, making sure there was water ready. But mostly, she listened, stretched her senses out into the white, silent world outside, trying to gauge the approach of the threat. They came 2 days later. She felt them first, a tremor in the air, a dissonance in the mountain's quiet harmony. "They're close," she whispered, gripping Silas's arm. "Just past the ridge." Silas nodded, his face grim. He positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. The knock was loud, brutal, shaking the cabin. "Silas, open up." Jedediah's voice, slurred and venomous. "Got something belongs to me in there." Alara shrank back, her blood running cold. Silas didn't reply. Another bang, harder this time. "Don't make me break it down, old man. I know you got her. The useless blind whore." The words were a physical blow. Alara flinched, tears starting again. Silas heard it, the pain in her small sound. Something shifted in his posture, from defensive to something fiercely protective. "She ain't yours anymore, Jedediah," Silas finally called out, his voice cutting through the door. "Got a bill of sale right here." A roar of rage. "That was a mistake. I want her back. And whatever else you got in there." With splintered, they were trying to break the door down. Silas moved swiftly. "Back corner, Alara. Stay low." He fired a shot through the wall near the doorframe. A yell of pain from outside. "He's hit," someone shouted. The blind which must have told him. Jedediah shrieked. "Burn the cabin down." Alara crawled into the corner, covering her head. The smell of smoke drifted in, acrid and terrifying. They were trying to set the cabin on fire. "East side," she yelled, her voice strained with fear, but clear. "They're piling kindling there." Silas fired another shot, then retreated from the door, grabbing a bucket of water. "There's a small fire starting on the east wall," he shouted, dousing the flames through a crack. Her sight was their defense. She was guiding him, calling out their positions, their actions. One by the big pine. He's got a torch. Trying the roof. Silas scrambled up to the loft, firing. Another cry. Jedediah's circling around back. Going for the window. Silas dropped back down, rifle aimed. The sound of breaking glass. Then a roar of pain as Silas fired point blank. Silence. Slowly, the sounds outside died down. Only the crackle of the fire Jedediah had started near the wall remained, slowly being extinguished by Silas. Alara stayed huddled in the corner, shaking. Silas came over, his footsteps heavy. He knelt beside her. "It's over," he said, his voice rough but laced with something new. She felt his hand gently touch her arm. It wasn't hesitant anymore. It was firm, grounding. "They're gone," she whispered. "They're gone," he confirmed. He helped her stand. "You all right?" She nodded, tears finally streaming down her face. But they were tears of relief, not despair. "Yes, I could see them. I could see everything." In the aftermath, the cabin was damaged, scarred by the attack. But it stood. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside pristine and white, bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. Silas moved through the cabin, assessing the damage, his movements less urgent now, a quiet exhaustion in his posture. Alara watched him, not with her eyes, but with that other sense, feeling the quiet strength that emanated from him, the surprising depth she had glimpsed beneath the gruff exterior. He came and sat by the hearth where she was warming her hands. The silence between them was different now. It was filled not with fear or uncertainty, but with the quiet understanding forged in shared danger. "You saved my life," he said, stating it plainly, without embellishment. She shook her head slightly. "We saved each other." He was quiet for a moment, tracing the line of a crack in the hearth stone with his finger. "That sight of yours. How?" She didn't have an answer. "I don't know. It's always been. A little. Like echoes. But here. It got stronger. Louder." She paused. "Maybe it's the quiet. The mountain. Or maybe it's being needed." He looked at her then, and though she couldn't see his face, she felt the weight of his gaze, kind and assessing. "You're not useless, Alara," he said, his voice soft, surprising her with its tenderness. "Not by a long shot." The words settled over her, warm and comforting, like the heat of the fire. They were an absolution, a redefinition of who she was. No longer Jedediah's burden, the blind woman traded away. Here, in this isolated cabin, on this unforgiving mountain, she was something else. Partner. Someone who could see in ways others couldn't, whose unique perception was not a deficit but a strength. The world outside was still harsh, the future uncertain. The winter would linger, and they were just two souls against the vast, indifferent wilderness. But the fear that had been her constant companion had lessened, replaced by a quiet determination. She had faced her past, faced the darkness both internal and external, and she had not only survived, she had found a way to thrive, to be seen for her true worth, not by sight, but by spirit and resilience. Silas stood up, stretching. "Lots to fix," he said, returning to his practical self. "I can help," she said, standing too. He nodded. "I know." There was no longer the hesitant searching in her movements. She knew the space now. She knew his presence. She knew herself. The storm had raged and passed, but in its wake, it had left behind something unexpected and strong. A partnership built on trust, necessity, and the quiet, powerful understanding that sometimes, the greatest vision comes not from seeing with your eyes, but from seeing with your soul. The mountain remained, silent and vast, but they would face it together, two unlikely allies finding light in the deepest dark.